I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Roger Spitz, a best-selling author, president of Techistential, and chair of the Disruptive Futures Institute. Roger's given over 100 keynote talks globally, is a frequent contributor across leading media, and has guest lectured at many of the world's most prestigious academic institutions. Roger has over 2 decades of leading investment banking and venture capital business experience, advising CEOs, founders, boards, and shareholders, evaluating their most strategic decisions, competitiveness, and disruptions ahead. He sits on a number of advisory boards of companies, climate councils, VC funds, and academic institutions worldwide. Roger is the author of The Definitive Guide to Thriving on Disruption and co-author of an existential framework for the future of decision-making, and has a track record of leadership in emerging technology over the course of his remarkable career. So Roger, welcome, sir. It is, again, truly an honor to have you with us today. I want to start out with The Definitive Guide to Thriving on Disruption, which is a 4-volume book collection that you published last November. Can you give me an overview of these books, I guess in a nutshell, what they're about, who should be reading them, and how they will benefit from this knowledge?
That's great. Thanks so much, Tim. Really a pleasure and honor to be on the show. And thanks for the glowing intro. I'll have to try and live up to some of that, but it's good storytelling anyway. So, no, listen, the guidebooks are a kind of funny story, as it often is. Things kind of end up being in a particular place. I had spent some time over the past few years thinking about the topics of complexity, nonlinear change, disruption in the broad sense. We'll come back to that. Futures and foresight, systems thinking, and really trying to kind of evaluate how everything is connected in that. And what was maybe a little bit esoteric as a pastime, and I started writing a book on that, then world events caught up with us, pandemic, other geopolitical events, and suddenly what might have been a little bit esoteric for many people, which is effectively decision-making, sense-making, and responses to unpredictable, complex, nonlinear environments, which is pretty much the world we live in. And that came to light with those events, and they're still very much at the forefront. And so suddenly those topics became extremely in demand and relevant when they dealt with, in a way that's insightful and impactful. And we just got gazillion amounts of interest and for talks and courses and that. And in building all these programs for different courses and workshops and all kind of things, we built a lot of material, case studies, and we spent a lot of time building it in a very structured way to deliver to very sophisticated or demanding clients and organizations worldwide. And at some point we felt, you know what? We get a lot of demand from the kind of general public for people who just want a book or something. And we thought, you know what, we actually feel there's a need in the world for a guidebook on how to make sense of our complex, nonlinear, unpredictable world. What are the practical frameworks, whether you're coming from a personal or business perspective? So the short answer is everybody, I think, can benefit from it and pretty much needs it. And the 4 volumes are simple. I mean, it sounds a little bit maybe ridiculous to have 4 volumes, but anyway, volume 1 is really the foundations, reframing and navigating disruption. Simply, how do you make sense of that world which is unpredictable, which is uncertain? The second volume is frameworks. Once you've made sense of that world, what are the essential frameworks for disruption and uncertainty? What are the practical frameworks that can help you, your business, your organization, policymakers, or yourself as an individual stay relevant in the 21st century? It's not even anything over ambitious. It's really, how do you stay relevant in that kind of environment? So what are the frameworks to help with that? Volume 3 is more your life. It's beta your life, existence in a disruptive world. What does this constant change and uncertainty mean to you as an individual? And you probably guessed it, volume 4 is your business. Disruption as a springboard for value creation. What does our unpredictable, complex, and systemic world mean for you as a business? So that's effectively how we've packaged them. They're meant to be self-contained. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and again, I will put a link into the YouTube show notes for this. So anyone who is interested in learning more about that, this is a massive body of work. And of course, this builds off of decades of incredible experience. So I would recommend that everybody check this out. Now, I want to get into disruption itself. I think that when most people think of disruption, they tend to focus on technology breakthroughs, right? I know for myself personally, I came up in the tech and telecom industry. And when we were talking about disruption, it was always tech related, right? But really, what we're talking about is smaller companies that are using innovation to challenge existing businesses. So, do you think it might be fair to say almost that incumbent market leaders are challenged because the market is transformed underneath them by these nimble upstarts?
Yeah, so there's a big debate indeed around what actually happens and semantics, perception, terminology, etc. So the way I like to describe it, and that's kind of how we framed it in our work, is disruption 1.0 is almost Joseph Schumpeter. It's almost creative destruction when you think about it more institutionally or as a country. After the World War, Second World War, there's reconstruction. That also has a lot of innovation. There's obviously a lot of harm, a lot of damage. Organizations, society, structures are kind of reshaped, damaged, hurt, killed off, or what have you. But through that, there's kind of the next phase and different kind of creative destruction. And then I think what you're describing is very much what 95, if not 100% of people who hear the word disruption kind of think about, which is, in a way, it's disruptive innovation, which Clayton Christensen coined, right? And that's, for me, it's disruption 2.0. It's discrete, it's specific, it involves a specific innovation or technology, and then something that is understandable, controllable, replicable, where if certain features are met, indeed, maybe an incumbent is chasing someone established with a legacy market through a different type of customer base, and then catches up and becomes bigger. And so, if you take Clayton Christensen's definition, he'll sort of say, okay, the criteria of Uber is not disruptive innovation because, yes, it's a new platform and it's an app, etc. But ultimately, you're targeting the same clients with pretty much transport, and it's the same thing. It's taxis, but with a different name, and it's the same people, but with an app instead of just hailing them on the road. Whereas Netflix, he'll sort of say, Netflix is disruptive innovation because you're targeting more kind of movie buffs. I'm talking about 15 years ago, movie buffs and people who are very into maybe a bit of technology or happy to get cassettes being sent home on specific kind of movies. And it's almost like a different target audience, but then it becomes mainstream and then catches up with the established players and that. Now, we actually label disruption, systemic disruption, as 3.0. It's disruption, which is a constant. It's systemic. And it's really the drivers of disruption are not discrete or technology or innovation or product related. There are a number of them, which include some of the big complex challenges, but it includes societal, paradigm shifts like information, society, complexity. It includes what we call irreversible drivers of disruption, such as AI, technology, or climate. It includes different types of change and some technological, some aren't. But effectively, all of those coming together and playing off each other, self-reinforcing, amplified in a nonlinear world, means that you end up with systemic disruption where you can't necessarily isolate the effects. And we use also disruption in a neutral way. It's not necessarily positive nor negative. Sometimes it's negative. Sometimes it depends on whether you're the initiator on the receiving end, whether you're prepared for it. Sometimes, of course, geopolitical events, which are, categorically negative and terrible. But a lot of the time, disruption depends on your view on the world, how prepared you are, and how you respond to events.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate you breaking it down actually into the 1, 2, and 3.0 stages. And I will try and use those correctly, hopefully. So let me jump back to kind of disruption 2.0 or disruptive innovation. The example that, again, I when I was writing these questions last night, the example that came to mind that I thought most people would know best is the iPhone, which changed consumer expectations and really redefined the market. But The other thing that was really interesting about that one in particular, and this tends to be a rule for a lot of these disruptive innovations, is that former market leaders, in this case, companies like Nokia and I think Microsoft, in a sense, they should have seen this consumer demand changing. There were plenty of hints that users wanted the messaging and the rich web experience and all of that the iPhone brought with it. But they didn't go for that, and they just got left behind. And that's something that I think that we've seen with Tesla and the electric vehicle market as well, right? And so I'm wondering, do you have any ideas why, once this disruption happens, once the change is in place and these new firms are able to cater to the evolved interests, why is it that old companies keep just plodding along and seem oblivious to the change?
Yeah, no, listen, it's really exactly as you describe it. And after 20 years plus advising in the way you mentioned in the intro, a lot of strategic decisions and that, I have actually little respect, I shouldn't really say that, but for a lot of those kind of strategy and leadership of that. And that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with futures and foresight as a kind of approach, because I think effectively it's really a kind of way of sensing early signals, being emergent in terms of imagining discontinuity, all kinds of different possibilities, preparing for change, instigating change, whether it's technology or otherwise, whether even preparing for pandemics or what have you. And so you're right, it's not Netscape for those who are, maybe my age or yours or what have you, who once dominated the browser market that anybody knows about, or Yahoo was #1 in the search engine, right? And you mentioned the iPhone. I mean, it's a phenomenal example. And for those who don't know this, it's one of my favorite documentaries, actually. There's a documentary at a company called General Magic. I think the documentary has the same name as the company. General Magic was a startup and a spin-off from Apple in 1990. And effectively, it's one of the most fascinating case studies because it was the precursor for the personal digital assistants, the PDAs, pretty much 15 years before the iPhone came out. And the infrastructure in the 1990s with internet and a number of other things didn't allow General Magic, but it kind of paved the way to achieve other breakthroughs. But General Magic was one of the precursors for multimedia email, for software modems, for touchscreens, and all kinds of things. And you think about all of those kind of core features of the iPhone, General Magic had that in 1990. And so there's a common saying in Silicon Valley, and don't get me wrong, I don't focus just on tech or innovation. I don't fuss that much about Silicon Valley, but one can't completely ignore innovation, and some of it is technological, and I happen to be in San Francisco, so I'm not going to, but there is a saying which I think is interesting, which is pioneers get the arrows while settlers get the land. And what you have with the S-curve of innovation is that you have the explorers, which really go for the unknown and who know nothing about the prior knowledge or the situation or new technology or whatever. And it's entirely new territory. That's, your Marco Polo, your Nikola Tesla, Xerox PARC, which invented the mouse before Steve Jobs and Apple did, General Magic we just talked about, maybe even SpaceX. So some work, some don't. And then you have the pioneers, and the pioneers, they follow behind the initial mapping. And it's easier to kind of do something when there's a map, maybe. And that's a lot of the world. It's, the semiconductors, Moore and Noyce, it's Steve Jobs and Wozniak with Apple, it's Bill Gates and Microsoft, Peter Thiel with PayPal. Some of it is kind of explorer, but some of it is pioneers. And then you have the settlers, and the settlers try and milk it when it's mature, it's established, it's mostly in the past. And I think one of the ideas is to kind of be the explorer as like a futurist in terms of evaluating weak signals and imagining different possibilities and discontinuity, but be projected mostly in the future as a pioneer, as opposed to a settler, which is kind of looking back. So it's kind of the fine line. You don't want to be too much of a General Magic or Xerox PARC, which kind of can say, yeah, I invented the mouse before Apple. You do want to be Apple versus Xerox, but it's kind of a fine line, but you don't necessarily want to just be the settler. So that's kind of how that S-curve or the innovation cycle. And it's basically, and we spend a huge amount of time on this in disruption, in kind of navigating change and especially identifying inflection points before they flex, because you often hear people kind of talk, and they're right, about change being slow. And it's true, change is slow. But the thing is that inflection points can be very quick and cascade. And so you want to kind of appreciate that change is slow, and there are different times to do different things in terms of innovation or what have you. But you also want to appreciate that you want to monitor a certain number of things and evaluate different possibilities and outcomes, because once you hit that inflection points, it's very quick.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And actually, you kind of answered my next question, which I think is almost more psychological in nature, about disruptive attempts that fail, right? When you were talking about the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land, my thought was, we remember the iPhone, but we forget the Apple Newton. And it's so easy to forget that these things are attempted and sometimes they don't work, right? So do you think the biggest lesson in that case is simply about timing?
So, I personally think the biggest lesson about this is kind of imagination and evaluating kind of weak signals. And again, foresight is a good umbrella for that, not to mean to kind of bang on about that because it's kind of what I focus on, but I came into foresight late. I've only been practicing this for the past 6 years at all, and full-time for only 3-4 years. Before that, I spent 20 years in investment banking. I understood strategy and how boards and leadership teams make decisions, and understood that reasonably well, very exposed to all kinds of different things. But I really feel that it's imagination which is kind of allows you to think of different possibilities, both in terms of preparing when shit happens and risks and issues, but also in terms of opportunities. Because again, disruption and change, we see it as kind of neutral. So you want to be the instigator of it. And so it's really imagining a multitude of different possibilities, having that beginner's mind. The Zen Buddhists and Japanese Eastern philosophy is very helpful for that. Shoshin, beginner's mind. Going back to first principles, people mark, of course, Elon Musk is a very easy target, especially with the Twitter saga and all that. But if you think about, SpaceX, it's phenomenal, the way he adopted first principles. And first principles not new. It's, the Greeks adopted first principles, but it's really challenging all the assumptions. Why is it that for space, Boeing and NASA and Airbus, who had been developing satellites and spacecrafts and that for like half a century, how come they were not the ones who were able to commercialize at scale in a cost competitive way? And Elon Musk, for all his current controversy or ridicule or whatever you want to call it, is a genius, but he also applied something very simple, which is first principles, which is taking a step back, taking a blank page, thinking about all the different possibilities, challenging the assumptions, not relying on assumptions or experience or hearsay, even from a leading company like Boeing, to sort of say, okay, how can one from scratch build a rocket? And his conclusion, just to kind of cut to the chase, is when he added up all the cost, the know-how, the materials to build the rocket, he evaluated that was probably less than 5% of the cost. Of the price of a rocket. And that's not because Boeing was cheating NASA or the US government. You don't do that. These are, although Boeing has had some controversies in terms of its Boeing 737 and that, contracts with the DoD and all that are very transparent. It's not because Boeing's getting 80% margins. It's because they just had not thought about and invented how to produce at scale in a cost-effective way. And so to come back to the issue of timing, I think timing might be kind of a consequence. And of course, some people are going to be lucky, less lucky, and timing, and you can be too early, of course. But I think often, if you're really thinking about broadly the possibilities, reimagining the world, picking up signals, being emergent in the way you try things, you're not going to just sit there and sort of say, oh, I got the timing wrong, because you can choose when you do things, when you launch, when you develop it, when the markets are ready. It's not just like, oh, timing suddenly fell on me and it was the wrong timing. I was a bit unlucky. I'm exaggerating. Of course, timing has a huge role to play, but it's not like something completely external that suddenly hits you,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Roger, I want to be sensitive to your schedule. So let me get into your consulting business, Techistential. And from going through the website, it looks like there are really two main areas that just get highlighted over and over again, climate and AI. So I want to ask about climate first. It seems like this is an issue. I mean, this is something that's important to all of us and to all of our children and, to our future. But it also seems like this is something that's very near and dear to your heart and you have a lot of subject matter expertise in. Can you tell me a little bit about, with the consulting business, again, from that perspective, how are you helping clients in terms of climate and sustainability? What kind of tasks are you engaged in there?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. It's an important topic for me and for the world, whether people realize it or not. But so Techistential is a foresight practice. So something we've been talking about is really the way we're cabled, thinking about futures, foresight, longer time periods, broader ways of driving systemic change, thinking about next order implications, challenging assumptions, and various other things, developing scenarios around possibilities and that. And now, I'm not myself an engineer or scientist or climate expert per se, so I don't have anything to bring in terms of actual concrete, on the ground solutions. But where we do spend a lot of time is thinking about systemic change. What is the difference between a sort of surface level discrete point solution or technology or startup, which effectively is a bit of a sort of shiny object or a bit of a PR thing, but if you think of an iceberg, is just above the iceberg, either just doing a PR or just doing a point solution or something specific. The challenge is that when you need to scale and interact in a complex world, how do you then drive systemic change? And so we help organizations think about what are virtuous inflection points, what are systemic transformation and transformative innovation versus a point solution. What are the levers that enable change? And that. And so, we spend time in fields like climate intelligence. I'm on the Climate Intelligence Council of a startup called Serviced, which helps, bring insights on an asset level to make decisions of long-term uncertainties as to how your asset base may be impacted in the long term by concrete, whether it's drought or whatever, but you need to make those decisions in terms of building resiliency and adaptability, because you need to make decisions on your assets today. The supply chains, do you reinforce your hotels? If you're a hotel chain, which ones, which priority, in which ways, etc. I'm also a partner with a venture capital fund called Vector Partners. We invest in the future of mobility. So again, if you think about the drivers, emissions, etc., I'm not the one who's directly finding the technology or the science to help reduce emissions, but we can orient, we raised a 125 million fund, we can orient our investments in terms of companies and technologies which are more likely to be helpful in terms of the future of mobility. I work a lot with energy companies who have been doing traditional, even if it's wind or non-polluting, non-fossil fuel, etc., energy generation, but to try and think more systemically around how they can bring that to sort of avoid being just kind of, I can do this and can do it in a kind of a better way, but how can they kind of bring more scale and systemic change to their activities? So it's really bringing that kind of systemic transformation foresight hat to the fray, as opposed to being a climate scientist or whatever, which I'm not, will never be, or what have you.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful to have you outline how that you're able to help. So I want to ask now about AI, and this is one that is just, I mean, climate makes headlines also, so I shouldn't play that down, but AI is just exploding right now. So how does your firm handle that, I guess? And I'm sure that you're probably getting lots of inquiries right now about that one. Where are you at on the AI issue, if I can ask?
Yeah, so again, we don't have a startup. We don't, sell AI or generate AI. Yeah. I'm not an engineer. I'm pretty much illiterate, I guess, compared to, most people who actually understand the code or whatever. So again, what we do is we try and think about the impact of AI and what should humanity, organizations, or individuals be doing in relation to AI. Some of it is thought leadership and talks and the work we publish, and some of it is indeed working with companies. Now, maybe just two or three words in terms of the debate itself, because it's quite topical, and you're following every day the different news flow about you should put a pause to the developments or you shouldn't, or
yeah,
I think and then I know you and I exchanged on some of the questions, and that I think the first thing that's interesting is why is it suddenly happening, and what did the world miss? And I think for those who again observe signals, think about the next order implications, and do that, the writing is on the wall. I've written about this quite a lot for quite a few years around human decision making and the value chain and the role of AI in decision making and the impact on humanity. And in fact, Techistential is a play with technology and existential, and we call Techistentialism is technology and existentialism, because AI, as opposed to just other technology, has a direct impact on human decision making. So it's a very serious societal and disruptive topic for education and for literally the future of humanity. Now, what happens with inflection points is that there's a bit of a paradox as to why you miss inflection points. And we call this the inflection paradox. In other words, on one hand, you have Amara's law, which is you overestimate the impact on things at the initial stage of an innovation, of a technology, but you underestimate it at a later stage, the full impact. So you get bored of things. Today, the metaverse, yesterday was AI. It's overhyped. You get bored of it. It's quickly deceptive. At the same time, there's exponential change where at the beginning, it's imperceptible. So you may be bored of the news flow, the hype, and whatever progress or change there is, you don't notice it because it's kind of an exponential curve and at the beginning. But at the end, it's kind of too late. Now, AI went through two major inflection points for those who bother to observe and connect the dots. One is computer vision and image processing. Once you understand vision and the building of visual systems, you're moving quite significantly to understanding, intelligence and a number of things. And on the other hand, natural language processing, when speech recognition moves from 90 to 95% to 98%, effectively, it then becomes something that's used all the time by everyone. I think it's Andrew Ng who talks about that a lot. And the increase in data, connectivity, computation, everything you imagine, basically are the AI inflection points. So that's point number one. Point number two, my biggest concern with this debate is twofold. One is what it means for decision-making and humanity, and what humans need to do to upgrade their capabilities of their own ability to navigate in complexity, to understand, you need pathways to be prepared to understand the language of AI, to understand the impact of AI. And there's a lot that goes with that around possible regulations for transparency and auditing. I had a long discussion with one of our fellow, Thomas Frey, another podcast futurist, and looking at how we think about technology. You need to anticipate what you can. Not everything is able to. You need to find ways of monitoring, and the anticipation needs to be, objectives aligned. You need accountability, competence in that. You need to then think about how do you monitor this with accountability, certain independence, feedback loops because it's evolving, and taking a systems approach to monitoring this. And then how do you mitigate it? Now, unless governments intervene, you can't have a moratorium or stop for 6 months. And even if governments intervene, at some point, where will the line be between a specific type of AI or LLMs and other technology? And what if some countries are doing it and not others? So the reality is that for governments who do not understand this type of technology, which is not necessarily that controllable or clear. I mean, even the best experts in the world will not agree on what to do and the impact it has and be able to anticipate those. And so I think the regulation personally should really be focused around the transparency, the auditing, some of the steps we talked about in terms of anticipation, monitoring, mitigation. And the final comment maybe is that it's quite interesting and almost amusing that, people like Elon Musk are signatories to the latest letter. Now it's probably everybody is. But it's very interesting because he's developing very deep AI and very important AI, and he warns against AI. And of course, he was initially part of OpenAI, and they've moved and become more of a commercial organization after the Microsoft investment. But the reason he publicly claims that he moved away from OpenAI is because he felt that his own AI activities within Tesla were potentially competing, and it was a conflict of interest. And I think that's probably fair and correct. But what it means is that our LLMs and OpenAI to then be stopped, but it's totally okay to do some of the AI in other respects, which can have impacts. So it's quite funny, the spectrum, of from the utopia, we call it kind of dystopia AI, kind of AI is a serious existential risk for humanity, pragmatic AI, prag AI-matic. So AI has benefits and you need safeguards. And then the other spectrum is utopia AI instead of utopia AI. And there's like, don't worry about anything. AI has strong benefits, clearly outweighing all the risks, and that's kind of people like Ray Kurzweil and others are kind of super pro tech, and Peter Diamandis and all that. And I think ultimately my biggest fear is really humanity. It's education, it's our ability to make decisions, to understand data, to process, to understand what's happening, and for us to upgrade ourselves. Because whether you reach singularity or AGI or whatever, machines are continuing to learn. And are we maybe not only not continuing to learn, but even being dumbed down? Is super stupidity the biggest risk with all this? Both of machines who don't understand what they're doing and humans who aren't kind of becoming intelligent enough or upgrading the intelligence to navigate the complex world. And so to wrap up, this actually connects with the initial part of the discussion, which is why do I do what I do? Why did we write these books, etc.? Because unless we can make better sense of our complex world, make decisions, understanding this nonlinear, unpredictable, and complex world, basically, de facto, we're delegating more and more decision-making and de-skilling ourselves to machines, whether it's LLMs, whether it's just AI decision-making, or whether it's just algorithms telling you what to watch on TV. So it's a pretty serious societal issue at so many levels. The problem, like many of these complex challenges, is that the fix is not necessarily so simple. So you have to really take a systems approach, and we could spend quite some time thinking about all this. But
wonderful. Roger, on that note, let me thank you so much for your time today. Again, absolutely wonderful, just amazing depth and insight. It is truly an honor to be able to interview you. Let me close by asking, what comes next for you? And do you have any thoughts or predictions on news headlines that we may see throughout the rest of 2023?
Yeah, no, listen, thanks for asking. So what comes next? I mean, we're releasing actually tomorrow, so great timing, and thank you for that. The volume 4 of our work. So for your business, disruption as a springboard for value creation. The interest we've got for these have been pretty incredible from all fronts for all kinds of things. So we're kind of thinking about how best to support those who are interested in understanding more on these topics. A lot of it will come from courses. We do a lot of executive education and tailored for programs for corporates and organizations worldwide. We haven't so much focused on the kind of market, and some people want more than just the volumes and the books. So we're basically developing a lot of courses for B2C, cohort-based podcasts, moving more into becoming a media and a content company. In terms of what to predict, so funny enough, futurists don't like or don't do predictions per se, but I think effectively the things we've been talking about will continue. So effectively, unfortunately, they're virtuous and positive tipping points. They're also dangerous tipping points. So I think, climate will continue to have the dangerous tipping points. I think, unfortunately, from the information AI and many topics, and this is a huge topic in its own rise, I think polarization, I've seen just Donald Trump being indicted now, and, it doesn't take much. We're seeing the things happening in France around pension reforms. It doesn't take much for any society, especially the democratic ones, actually, unfortunately, to kind of themselves reach certain tipping points, which are societal, and that's quite dangerous. and intentional. They're puppets that are sort of driving that. So there's a lot of, the misinformation is not accidental. There are a lot of puppets and outside agent and bad actors who are manipulating that. I think AI continuing its journey in terms of decision making, things which many of us, futurists and other people, ethicists and others have been thinking about for quite some time. This is now becoming mass market because it's practical, concrete realization. And then, of course, the sensationalization and shortcuts of the media and commentaries. We don't really, I'm pretty dismissive of trends and that in a general sense. So I kind of try and look at all this and look at the next order implications. But our drivers of disruption, effectively, for me, those will just continue to become more and more prominent. So it's, the irreversible aspects of tech, AI, and climate. It's paradigm shifts in terms of society, information, complexity. It's, space, quantum, those kind of new areas of discoveries. It's how do you stay relevant through, we call it the Red Queen race, for, from Alice in Wonderland, and the Queen who sort of says, I need to run twice as fast to stay in the same place. So, that's the barriers are becoming lower to learn, to produce, to work, decentralize. So that can be very positive. It's also very dangerous. And then what we call new change, which is the things we've been talking about, the self-reinforcing effects of technology, AI, all of that in a sort of self-reinforcing systemic mode, which has a huge impact on then, humanity in itself.
Wonderful. On that note, let me thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
Great, Tim. Thanks for having me. I hope it's of interest to your audience, and have a good rest of the day.